There are many stories that describe horrific crimes whose cause no one knows to this day. They are not just crimes investigated by the police, but rather real, terrifying stories that happened to people whose lives were ordinary, similar to the lives of any person. You may not believe the events or find them illogical, but our story today is real. It is one of the most famous, historical, mysterious stories in Germany. Such stories are classified as strange phenomena, and not just a horrific crime in which an entire family was killed. The story of the Bavarian family. Our story today is about a German family living in the state of Bavaria. This family was investigated for a crime that happened to them for a period that no one could imagine at all, as the family murder was investigated for 85 years. This may seem strange to some, and there are those who did not believe that this case was investigated for all that period. The investigation began in 1922 AD and ended in 2007 AD. The crime occurred specifically in March, specifically on the 31st. The family that was exposed to this tragedy is the Gruber family, along with the maid who worked in the house. The number of family members was 5, and they were all killed along with the maid. 6 months before the crime, it all started. There was a maid working in the family home. This maid used to hear strange sounds around the house. She would hear knocking on the windows of the house, and sometimes she would hear whispers in the corridors and other sounds that would make anyone who heard them feel very scared. The maid did not hesitate to tell the family members what she had heard. But the family members did not believe the maid and told her that all of this was just hallucinations. The maid was sure that she had heard these sounds, and for this reason she could no longer continue working and decided to leave the job. And this is what actually happened. The situation remained the same until one day before the crime, when the family decided to bring in a new maid. On the same day that the new maid arrived, the family began to hear the same sounds that the previous maid had told them about. Not only that, but the family noticed some strange and suspicious things that began to happen in the house without knowing why such things happened. For example, the father found a newspaper on the floor that he or any of the family members had not bought before, in addition to the disappearance of the keys to the storeroom that contained the equipment that the family members used on a regular basis. All of these things may have been normal, but one day something suspicious happened. The weather was very cold and the snow was falling heavily. One of the family members noticed strange traces on the snow. These traces were coming from the forest and reaching the house, not only to the house, but specifically inside the house. This is not the only terrifying thing, but what is terrifying is that these traces are traces of a creature or a person who entered the house but did not come out. The traces show that this thing is still inside the house. Terror began to creep into the family's hearts, and they remembered well the words of the previous maid. The father, whose name was Andreas, went to his neighbor and told him what had happened, and even told him about the previous maid's talk. The neighbor told him that he had to arm himself in case of any emergency, but Andreas refused. On the specified day, which is the day that all the family members were killed, the crime took place. There was indeed a killer who had sneaked into the house. On that day, the killer took the family members one by one to the barn to kill them. 4 members of the family were killed and placed in the barn. As for the 5th member, she was the little girl. The killer killed her and the new maid in the house. The strange thing is that the killer did not kill the family and escape. Rather, the killer remained in the house for several days after committing the murder. The crime was not discovered until 5 days after it was committed. The reason is that no one noticed anything suspicious around the house. There was smoke coming out of the fireplace, and the barn was full of animal food, and everything seemed normal. All of this was the reason for not discovering the crime. On the 5th day of committing the crime, there was a worker who had agreed with the family members to come and fix one of the agricultural machines. Indeed, that worker came and started knocking on the door, but no one answered him. The worker decided to fix the machine because it was outside the house. After the worker finished fixing the machine, he noticed something suspicious, which was the presence of a dog tied to the door of the house. This dog was not there. Here, the worker confirmed that the family was inside the house. The worker did not have much time, so he decided to go to the family's neighbor, Lawrence. The worker told Lawrence what happened. Lawrence decided to go check on the family, especially since he hadn't seen any of them for nearly 5 days. Lawrence arrived at the house but didn't find anything inside. He went to the barn and found the family members killed. Lawrence immediately informed the police, who came and began their investigation. You may not have believed that the first suspect was Lawrence himself, because he was the closest to the family. Not only that, but because Lawrence wanted to marry the family's daughter, but Father Andreas refused. The investigation, which proved Lawrence's innocence, continued for a long time. But in the end, nothing was reached, and the case ended in 2007.